That's quite the introduction. I don't think I've ever quite been called a Wonder Woman, but my job title, as you can see, is pretty funny and maybe alludes to that. So this morning, I live about 3 kilometers away from here. And I was coming to the conference center this morning in the pouring rain, perhaps you can tell from my hair. And I was walking here, took the tram for a little bit, and I did this thing that I like to do sometimes when I'm trying to get ready for a talk and focus, and that's count surveillance cameras. Now, I know that sounds a little ridiculous, but so does counting sheep to fall asleep, and I'm sure some of you have done that. So I was trying to count the surveillance cameras on my way. There's one on the tram, here's one in the station, another one outside this shop, another one here, another one there. All told, within that 3-kilometer stretch, I counted probably 10 to 12 surveillance cameras. Not so many. But this is Berlin. And even though we're in a former seat of the GDR, which is quite known for its sophisticated surveillance, nevertheless, Berlin, you have a little bit of privacy. But is anyone here from London? And have you ever tried counting surveillance cameras there? It's actually not possible because you can't see them all at the same time. There's so many of them. And that's true of New York now, and it's becoming more true of places like Paris and Hong Kong and almost all of these major cities around the world. Surveillance cameras and other forms of surveillance have become absolutely ubiquitous. And now ubiquitous surveillance is being rolled out into... Sorry, I haven't tried this yet. There we go, excellent. It's being rolled out into consumer products, and new technologies are being pioneered by nation states, and our lives are becoming increasingly interconnected through invisible systems. Essentially, we're living under a microscope. And the thing about surveillance is that the knowledge of it, even the perception that surveillance is happening, can have a chilling effect on our freedom of expression. You were wondering how the privacy and freedom of expression connected? Well, that's how. A 2012 study by the World Economic Forum found that 50% of users, internet users, living in high internet penetration countries, so in other words, what we might call the global north, with a handful of other countries built in, 50% of users in those countries believe that they're being surveilled by their governments. And probably 100% of them are correct, right? So we need to be asking some questions. Who benefits from a technology? Who's creating it? And who should have the rights to our data? Because right now, what we have is a murky gray zone between who's building, capturing, and benefiting from our technology. Now, traditionally, I love that we're in this room with all of these murals as I say the means of production. Traditionally, the means of production have been controlled by those seeking to consolidate power. But today, technology, and particularly technology's corporate actors, because technology itself can be neutral, but technology's corporate actors and its environment is a new form of power consolidation. Now, I moved to Berlin about 3 years ago, but I moved here from San Francisco. Is anyone from or has lived in San Francisco? So you probably know what I mean when I say that technology in the Bay Area is creating more and more divides. If you disagree with me, we can hash that one out over lunch. But I see it creating a bigger and bigger divide, and I see these systems being put into place, creating much more convenience for the wealthy, and also much more surveillance for everyone. So I'm going to talk quickly about facial recognition, because I think that this is one of the most pressing surveillance issues of our time. Of course, there are many other things, and I might get to a couple of them, but I'm going to focus on this one today. Because the facial recognition market is projected to be worth $6.84 billion US by 2021, which sounds like sometime in the future, but is actually only 4 years away. That's funny. So this slide is interesting. So as users, you probably agree that we interact with technology through its functionality, through the user interface, through design, and through its killer features. Now, this is kind of a silly little website, but behind the scenes, quite interesting. So there was this 2005 Microsoft project, you're seeing it here, and the intent of this product was to guess your age or gender. Now, this was just an experiment, and it wasn't even meant to go public. But what actually happened was that enough people shared it, probably on social media, I don't know the precise details, enough people shared it that within 24 to 48 hours, the entire site was flooded with users. They could barely keep it up. The servers were not prepared for that many people, because it turns out that people think that it's kind of funny to have a machine guess their age. Your average person thinks that this is kind of a killer feature, and so they all dove in. Now, Microsoft is not always benevolent, but it's more benevolent than other companies, let's say. We know Bill Gates' goals are to make the world a better place, even if he doesn't always succeed. But sometimes other apps come forward with the same kinds of things, and maybe they're not so benevolent. In July 2016, just last summer, there was a site that came out called Face My Age that had a very similar purpose to this one, but actually asked users to supply other information, such as their age, their gender, and more, including things like marital status or whether or not the person smoked cigarettes. Now, in that case, we don't know what happened to that data because the site went down shortly after. But basically, you had a bunch of different people, members of the public, enticed to provide not only their photograph, but also all kinds of personal information about themselves that they probably wouldn't even put all in one place on Facebook. But because, ooh, this app has an interesting idea behind it, an interesting design, something that helps me in my life, or something that's entertaining, people flock to these things, give them all sorts of data, and then walk away not realizing what's going to happen. And oftentimes, databases like that can end up serving the wrong ends. And here's my favorite example of that. Who's familiar with VKontakte? Lots of people. OK, cool. So you see this referred to, for those who are not, you see it referred to in the media as the Russian Facebook. I've never actually used it myself, so I don't know if that's an accurate descriptor or not. But nevertheless, it is a social platform. And there's a tool that came out not so long after that called FindFace. Has anyone heard of FindFace? Oh, FindFace is fun. So the idea behind FindFace is that you can take a picture of anyone on the street. I can take a picture of you. And if you're using VKontakte, I can run that image across VKontakte's 410 million users. And so theoretically, I could go to a crowd, a protest perhaps, take pictures of people, and then identify them. No way that this is going to be used for evil, right? It already has been. It was pretty quickly, in fact. So the first thing that happened was a young artist called Igor Svetkov conducted an experiment on the St. Petersburg subway where he took photographs of people on the transit system and then ran it through the database and was able to identify those people. Pretty harmless, right? Just a few short months after that, another group of people decided that it would be fun to out pornography actresses in Russia. So they took these actresses' faces from still clips from porn videos, ran them across the database, and successfully doxed a number of different actresses. Now, a lot of the attitude toward this, at least in some of the media I read, was like, oh, well, they're in porn, they deserve it. I disagree. I hope that you do too. Fact is, these things can be used for dangerous purposes pretty quickly. But there's a whole proliferation of forgot about this quote. Yes, the founder. It also looks for similar people, so you could just upload a photo of a movie star that you like, hint, hint, or your ex, and then find 10 girls who look similar to her and send them messages. This is the founder of FindFace who said this. I forgot that I have this quote in there. It's like a nice Easter egg for me, too. Hashtag stalker tech. But there's a great there we go. There's a great proliferation of these types of companies, not necessarily as vehemently evil as FindFace, but you've got Sitecourt, which provides a complete understanding of human behavior through things like eye tracking. It can identify your age, your gender, even your mood. We've got Kairos, which does emotion analysis, emotional intelligence with just a few lines of code, its new website says. Oh yes, of course, just a few lines of code can provide the same kind of emotional intelligence as a human being, I'm sure. And then there's Cognitech, which actually on its website right now, it actually says that it provides anonymous face recognition. Just sit with that for a second, because I don't know what it means, and I'm not sure they do either. So what happens when these databases, what happens to these faces and how they're used? Well, I think that Kate Crawford has an interesting thought about this. The idea that algorithms learn by being fed certain images, often chosen by engineers, and that systems build a model of the world based on those images. But if a system is trained on photos of people, for example, who are overwhelmingly white, it will have a harder time recognizing non-white faces. Can anyone think of a company that had that problem? Google! Because Google, oops, they trained all of their algorithms with white people, and now they think that black people are gorillas. This really happened. This is horrible. This is Google, a multi-billion-dollar company, and they couldn't get this right because they weren't thinking about the human in the process. They weren't thinking about the human in the loop, and so when they created and trained these systems, they trained them in a way that allowed that to happen. I can't even really look at that. It horrifies me. So What other ways could facial recognition be possibly used for harm? Well, here you've got a neural network that learns to identify criminals by their faces. This one's pretty awful, and I think raises, as this article says, serious ethical issues about how we should use AI. And then you've got this one. This one's really interesting. The Georgetown, I've lost my card. There we go. Georgetown study where law enforcement facial recognition networks were found to include over 117 million American adults. And these were compiled by things like through things like live surveillance videos. And of course, once again, this disproportionately affects marginalized communities, and in the US specifically, disproportionately affects Black communities. And so without interrogation of test and training data, there will be replication bias. And the proliferation of these interconnected systems means great harm, potentially. It's just another example. We've got gait recognition, tattoo recognition. All of these things coming together can provide a really complete picture of who you are based on just a few pieces of data. Your face, the way that you walk, the tattoos that I'm personally regretting getting years ago before I knew that tattoo recognition would be a thing. And then, of course, how can I bring it back to this community? Because you're probably wondering, yeah, but I'm at a blockchain conference. What's she talking about? Well, I think that the people in this room have the ability to build new systems, to circumvent these old systems, and to build things that can truly make a difference. So just an example, what's the thing that blockchain is most known for to the public? Bitcoin, right? Cryptocurrencies. And one of the things that I think is really fascinating about cryptocurrencies is the ability to get around existing systems that perpetuate inequality. Can I give you an example of this? How many people here know that Visa and MasterCard don't allow certain obscene content to be paid for using their systems? Yeah? Okay, so this includes things like erotic literature on Amazon. This has happened in the past, where Visa and MasterCard put on their prudish glasses and their pearl necklace and say, oh no, we couldn't possibly. But it happens all the time. And so I think that this is one of the fascinating possible applications. And one of the things to think about, too, when it comes to privacy. Because if you're buying those things, do you want that to be on your Visa or MasterCard? Unfortunately, probably not, because in this society, we still have shame, and shame often leads to an increased need for privacy. Click. There we go. And of course, we've got the fact that these systems can often continue to perpetuate inequality. And so one of the interesting things here, one of the studies that I read in doing my research for this, is trying to nail down an argument for you as to why privacy matters. Now, I've given that talk many, many times, and I think that a lot of people here are more aware of privacy and why it matters than a lot of the people that I speak to. But one of the things that I found really interesting in kind of taking this into the context of mobile payment systems, or payment systems in general, is I found a study that said that 42%, and this is a US government study, so I kind of trust it, 42% of US consumers are wary of mobile payment systems. Why? Because of privacy concerns. And so this is another area where I think that we can be building better systems on top of what currently exists, or entirely around what currently exists. But I think that we have to start asking ourselves, what world do we want? I like this image because to me it represents privacy as an uphill battle. I don't know what it represents to the artist, I didn't ask. But I think that privacy is an uphill battle, but it's one worth fighting for. And so to the people in this room, I think that you have the capacity to change the future. I think that the things that you're working on are more innovative, more impossible, more big dreaming than a lot of the things I've seen over the past years. But I also think that that gives you an additional responsibility. Last night when I was sitting at the table with a few people at dinner, I won't point them out, but thank you for your wonderful conversation, the three of you. One of the things that we were talking about was just how big of a gap there is between the work that you are all doing and the general public's understanding of it. There's a huge gap. And so I think that because of that, we have an additional responsibility in this community to not only build privacy into the things that we're working on, but to explain that to the general public, to help them understand why these systems could be better, what makes them better, and how. And then, of course, I think please try to remember that the privacy implications of the things that you're building must be taken into account. Privacy matters. Thank you.
This is a superwoman. So if you have any questions, we have a few questions that could be popping up. So, yeah, there will be a mic coming over.
I'll do my best to know the answers.
Thank you for the talk. So my question has to do with current developments in AI. Well, first of all, I think privacy is important for our society, but it's also a pretty young concept because people in medieval age probably didn't really have much privacy in their houses. Then some other people now would argue that we're moving not just into Internet of Things, but also Internet of Eyes, where you have more cameras and processing more videos, which could be supported by AI to do image recognition, like objects, but also motion detection. And they think this will help us in the future, like better healthcare in hospital patient rooms, or detection of aggressive acts. But that also means that there will be probably more surveillance depending on who owns those cameras. Do you think Internet of Eyes is a good idea? And do you think there's a way we can move into such a way of living without giving up privacy?
Thank you. That's such a thoughtful question. So to your first point, I do want to say that I think that privacy, the conception of privacy, differs greatly from culture to culture, and I'll give you my favorite analogy really quickly to explain it. Have most people here been to the US before? Yeah? So you might notice there that when you go to a public bathroom, there's one really, really ridiculous element of it, and that there's always like a little bit of a crack in the door, so if somebody wanted to, they could watch you. Have you ever noticed that? Yeah, I don't get it, but also at the bottom of the stall, there's also like this much space so that somebody could put their head under and watch you. I don't know why this exists. And then if you go to Germany or most places in Europe, the door is from the floor to the ceiling. It's quite private, yeah? But then there are other parts of the world where people go pretty much out in the open. And I think that that's kind of a nice analogy, that just kind of a gross analogy, but a nice analogy that explains the way that our different conceptions of privacy have evolved even until now. And so I do agree with you that it's generally a fairly young concept, but I think that most people, and we can see this from young people and how they interact with technology, most people have an internal kind of conception of privacy and what it means to them. Now, as far as the Internet of Eyes goes, I'm going to be really honest. Sometimes when I'm writing these talks, like I just want to drink a whole bottle of whiskey, throw my hands up in the air, and just say, like, I need to live in the woods. Not a particularly helpful thing to do. I'm kind of good at my job. I should probably keep doing it. But I do get really frustrated, and I think that there are ways that cameras can help us. Cameras, whatever new technology, is equated with surveillance. I think that, in healthcare, for example, there are ways in which we can ensure not only, things like quicker emergency response, but even the safety of a patient. And so I'm not fundamentally opposed to all of these uses. But I think that a lot of times people are not thinking of the impact on the average person. And I think that that's true in this space as well, in the space when we're talking about blockchain. I think that a lot of, maybe not you guys, but a lot of the things that I hear outside of this room when people talk about these technologies is sort of pie in the sky thinking that doesn't really get at how said technology, whatever it is going to impact your average individual. And so that's what we have to keep in mind at all times. Who's building the technology? Who benefits from it? And really, what do we want from the technology? And so I can't say whether or not I think it's a good thing or a bad thing. I do kind of tend toward lately moving away from technology because it scares me. But yeah, I think it's a really good question. We should just always be asking who's benefiting from it.
Yeah, one more question. I'm trying to diversify a little bit, so I'm gonna.
Thank you, Michael Moditz, Data Fund. My company is working a lot with personal data. And I have a very simple question for you. But first, thank you for the great presentation. So if I'm talking with different people about privacy, they always say, not always, but many times, they say, well, I have nothing to hide. So what do you say then?
I love that question. Thank you. Yeah, I'm actually giving a talk on that in 2 days from now, but I'll give you the preview here. So the whole I've got nothing to hide argument, one of the things that I like to say to people is, okay, give me your wallet then. If you've got nothing to hide, surely I can just copy down all of your information, yeah? But, okay, that argument doesn't always work so well. I think that there's kind of 3 points that I find effective in talking about this. The first one is quite simple, and that's that you might not have anything to hide right now, but your life could always change or your government could always change. And I think that us Americans understand this one really, really well right now, because under Obama, we were like, oh, surveillance, the NSA, not such a big deal, we kind of trust this guy. And now we're under somebody who's trying to, sue or subpoena a website for an I don't even like to say his name, but a website that was against him. They're trying to subpoena all of the data of people who visited that website. So things can change quickly. Always try to remember that. That's the first one. I think the second one is that we don't know all laws. No one knows all laws. I've got a funny story about a lobster that I can tell you later. I don't want to take up too much time, but there's a really interesting legal story here. But basically, if you look at the US, for example, our federal law books, you can't fit them into one bookshelf. There's so many federal laws, and I guarantee you don't know all of them. So you may think you have nothing to hide, but that becomes less true the moment that you cross one of those lines. But the third and most important point to me is that if we had had the kind of ubiquitous surveillance that we're beginning to have now, we wouldn't have the movements that we've gotten that brought us to this place that we're at in time. And what I mean by that is gay rights. When it was illegal to be homosexual, people had to organize, and that's true still currently. I mean, just this week in Cairo, people were arrested for raising a rainbow flag. So when it was illegal to organize around this, people chose to do it anyway in order to fight for their rights. Scientific movements, we wouldn't have the science that we have now if people didn't take those risks. There was a time that you could get hanged for saying that the world was round. And so I think that with the kind of surveillance that we have now, those movements wouldn't have been able to thrive and we wouldn't be here. And we have to remember that now as we try to organize for a better world as well. Thank you.
Wow.